It began with a video, silent, cold, and merciless. No background music, no commentary, just a shuffle of bare feet against concrete echoing through a corridor that looked endless. Thousands of men, their heads shaved, tattoos glistening under harsh white light, were marched in single file by masked guards. Their faces, once symbols of terror, now blank, stripped of identity. The camera panned slowly, capturing the humiliation, the submission, the eerie quiet that followed the president's orders. Around the world, the footage spread like a storm. No one could look away. CECOT, the Center for Confinement of Terrorism. The caption read, as though the words themselves carried divine authority. In living rooms and on phone screens, people debated whether this was redemption or revenge. The images were both awe-inspiring and disturbing, a nation's victory and its confession of fear. Commentators called it the gates of hell. Supporters called it justice. But for the men inside that fortress, it was the beginning of something far darker. Among them was Santos, once a ruler of the streets, now inmate 41762. As the guards barked orders, his eyes stayed fixed on the floor, not in defeat, but in quiet calculation, what the world saw as the end of violence. Santos saw as the start of another kind of war. Inside the presidential command center, the glow of a dozen monitors painted Nayib Bukele's face blue. His aide spoke in hushed tones, listing arrest numbers and logistics, but his focus never wavered from the footage. The prisoners kneeling in rows like fallen dominoes. He clasped his hands behind his back and said softly, "Look at them. They once owned the streets. Now the streets own peace." His words hung in the air, steady as scripture. Outside, thunder rolled over San Salvador, but inside, the president smiled faintly, knowing the world was watching. Reporters hesitated to ask questions. Was this the birth of a miracle or a dictatorship in disguise? Bukele's calm radiated confidence, but his eyes told another story, one of exhaustion and obsession. To him, the footage was not brutality. It was order finally restored. Yet in that silence, even he must have sensed that something unholy stirred beneath the concrete of his creation. For every cheer echoing beyond CECOT's walls, there was a whisper that justice had gone too far. In a cell lit by a single flickering bulb, Santos sat cross-legged, wrists cuffed, breathing the thick metallic air. Sweat beaded down his tattooed arms as a guard's boot nudged his back. "Eyes down," the man barked. Santos obeyed, but a faint smile crossed his lips. "They think they've buried us," he whispered to the man beside him. "But they've only planted something darker." The word spread like smoke through the cell, carried on nervous breaths. Every prisoner heard them, even those pretending not to. Once, Santos commanded entire neighborhoods. His orders decided who lived and who vanished. Now he was property of the state, inmate 41,762, stripped of power but not of will. The chains clinking around his wrists were heavy, but they couldn't bind the venom in his thoughts. He scanned the cold ceiling and pictured the streets he once ruled, imagining the hum of life outside, the smell of fear, the sound of motorcycles cutting through the night. Hell, he thought, is just another territory. In CECOT, even damnation had a hierarchy, and Santos was already planning to climb it. 2 years earlier, San Salvador's streets were rivers of blood. Gunfire was as common as thunder. Children could distinguish the rhythm of a 9mm from an AK-47 before they could spell their own names. Mothers learned to dig graves. Fathers learned to vanish before nightfall, and entire neighborhoods disappeared behind a curtain of fear. Each wall bore the graffiti scars of ownership. 13 or 18, the invisible borders that split families and carved death zones into the map. Police patrols refused to enter certain streets without military backup. Ambulances drove with headlights off. Journalists wrote obituaries before interviews. In those days, the capital didn't sleep. It only bled quietly. The gangs had become gods in denim and ink, deciding fate with the pull of a trigger. The government's grip had loosened to the point of surrender, and to the world outside, El Salvador was no longer a country. It was a countdown waiting for zero. Santos reigned over the western side of the river, a labyrinth of alleys, sweat, and silence. Across the water, his rival, Carlos El Flaco Melendez, ruled the east for MS-13. The The bridge between them wasn't concrete. It was blood. Every crossing drew bullets. Every insult drew fire. They'd grown up blocks apart, yet lived in different worlds. You see that side? Santos would say to his recruits, "That's death. Our job is to deliver it first." Each night, El Flaco's men painted new graffiti. Fresh red 13ths over faded 18ths. By morning, Santos's soldiers crossed the river to repaint theirs. The city became a battlefield of symbols. Locals prayed to invisible lines drawn by fear. The gangs were no longer fighting for money or power. They were fighting for existence itself. And as the killing mounted, the nation's heartbeat slowed to match the rhythm of gunfire. At 17, Santos had stood in the center of a circle, fists raining down on him from every side. 13 seconds, that was a test. 13 seconds of pain to prove loyalty. 13 seconds to erase childhood. When it ended, he was on the ground, bleeding and smiling. They gave him a new name, a new family, a new code. Vivo por mi madre, muero por mi barrio. I live for my mother, I die for my neighborhood. The gang became his bloodline. They taught him how to shoot before he learned to shave, how to hide bodies before he learned to drive. For a while, the power felt intoxicating. People feared him. Girls loved the danger in his eyes. But somewhere deep down, a part of him knew the price. No one retires from Barrio 18 alive. Every scar was a signature on his death warrant. And by the time he was 20, Santos was already an old man in a young body. By 2015, entire sections of the city had become no-go zones. Police turned back at graffiti walls, and politicians only mentioned those neighborhoods in prayers. Residents whispered passwords at checkpoints manned by teenage boys with rifles. Fear was the local language. Even the church bells stopped ringing. Funerals had become too frequent to mourn. The gangs had rewritten the law. Businesses paid rent to survive. Bus drivers paid to drive. Children paid to breathe. Every sunrise was borrowed time. The government's presence ended where the asphalt cracked, and beyond that line, the only rule was silence. Inside those borders, Santos was king, but even kings know when kingdoms are built on corpses. Then out of nowhere came a face on every billboard, Nayib Bukele. Young, charismatic, wearing sneakers instead of suits. He looked more like a rock star than a politician. But his voice carried the fury of a nation. "Enough," he said at a rally. "We are not afraid anymore." His words lit fires in hearts that had long gone cold. The people believed again, and belief is the most dangerous weapon of all. In dim safe houses, gang leaders watched his speeches on crack TVs. "He's different," said one. "He means it." Bukele wasn't just another politician promising safety. He was a storm dressed in confidence. To the people, he was hope. To the gangs, he was war given a name. The night of the rally, the crowd stretched for blocks. Mothers, soldiers, teenagers, even ex-gang members stood shoulder to shoulder as Bukele spoke under pouring rain. "We will clean this country," he roared. Thunder answered him. His words sliced through the air like a blade, and for the first time, fear changed sides. High above, on the rooftops, the gangs watched. "He's coming for us," muttered El Flaco. Santos smiled through a cigarette smoke. Then let him. In that moment, the war declared itself without bullets, a war of silence, strategy, and vengeance waiting for daylight. The crackdown began quietly, no warning, no mercy. One morning, soldiers in black armor sealed off entire blocks. Checkpoints appeared overnight, and the sound of helicopters drowned morning prayers. Men were dragged from homes, faces pressed into dirt, wrists tied with plastic cords. Tattoos, even symbols of love, became death sentences. For the first time, fear changed direction. The hunters became the hunted. Mothers wailed as sons disappeared into armored trucks. The government called it cleansing. The world called it control. And somewhere in the chaos, Santos knew the prophecy had come true. The storm had arrived, and it spoke the language of order. The soldiers came before dawn, when the sky was still bruised with night. Their boots struck the dirt like thunder as flashlights cut across the slums. Dogs barked, babies cried, and the silence that followed felt like a held breath. Santos woke to the sound of his front door splintering apart. On the ground, a soldier shouted. He didn't resist. The beam of a flashlight washed over the tattoos on his chest. Names, dates, symbols of the past. His wife screamed, clutching their baby, but the soldier only said, "He's a number now." Outside, the street was lined with armored trucks, their engines rumbling like beasts ready to feed. Neighbors watched from their windows, faces pale, curtains half-drawn. No one dared to speak. Santos was dragged through the mud barefoot, his wrists bound so tight they turned white. Somewhere in the chaos, a camera light blinked. Another moment of justice for the president's highlight reel. As the truck door slammed shut, Santos looked back once, memorizing the outline of his house. He knew he'd never see it again. The convoy roared off, carrying him toward the place the world would soon call hell. The convoy rolled through endless countryside until a shadow rose in the distance, a fortress of concrete and steel, miles wide, wrapped in barbed wire that glittered like ice under the sun. This was CECOT, the Center for Confinement of Terrorism. The gates opened with a groan that sounded almost alive. Inside, the air was hot, dry, sterile. No grass, no color, only gray walls and gray uniforms. "Welcome to your new home," a guard muttered as he shoved Santos forward. The prisoners were processed like livestock. Names were replaced with numbers, fingerprints with barcodes. Cameras stared from every corner, blinking like unblinking eyes. As Santos walked to the corridor of lights, the smell of bleach burned his lungs. He looked up at the endless rows of cells, each one filled with faces that once ruled the streets. Now they were silent, kneeling, heads down. To the outside world, this place meant victory. To those inside, it was purgatory built by human hands. Where time didn't pass, it paused forever. The door slammed behind him with a metallic echo. When Santos turned, his breath caught. Across the cell, sitting against the wall with that same crooked grin, was El Flaco, the man he'd sworn to kill. "Looks like hell's smaller than we thought," El Flaco said, his voice dripping sarcasm. The air grew thick. For a moment, Santos imagined lunging, wrapping his hands around that grin. But the guards above watched through cameras. Violence here meant a death sentence. So the two old enemies sat shoulder to shoulder in silence, their past wars reduced to a few inches of cracked floor. Nights passed with no stars, only fluorescent light that never died. In the hum of electricity, grudges faded into exhaustion. "You still hate me?" El Flaco asked one night. Santos stared at the ceiling. "Hate takes energy," he said quietly. "And here we don't even have air." The silence that followed said more than words. Two killers united not by peace, but by survival. Every morning began with the same ritual. Boots pounded the catwalks above. Steel doors clanged open one by one. Guards barked orders, their voices sharp as blades. Down, hands on head. The prisoners obeyed in mechanical rhythm, a ballet of submission choreographed by fear. Santos knelt on cold concrete, the floor still damp from disinfectant. The hum of cameras never stopped. Every move, every breath recorded. When the inspection ended, the smell of sweat and bleach lingered in the air. A few men coughed, others prayed under their breath. The guards marched away, leaving silence so heavy it rang in the ears. It was then, in those rare moments of stillness, that Santos felt the weight of it all. Not just the walls, but the system itself, a machine built to crush the soul until obedience became instinct. In the corner of the cell sat Rafael, 19, thin, trembling. His tattoo was small, just the initials M.A., but it was enough. "They said it means MS," he whispered, "but it's my brother's name." His voice cracked halfway through. Santos didn't answer. He'd seen too many boys like him, swallowed by the same machine, mistaken for monsters before they had the chance to become men. That night, Rafael couldn't sleep. He whispered questions about the outside world, about hope, about forgiveness. Santos pretended not to hear, but deep down, the boy's voice stirred something buried. Once, long ago, he'd been that boy, eager, desperate, chasing belonging in all the wrong places. As the lights flickered overhead, Santos turned to the wall and closed his eyes. "Survive," he muttered. "Don't believe in anything else." While CECOT swallowed men whole, the world outside celebrated. The murder rate plummeted. Streets that once echoed with gunfire now rang with laughter and music. Tourists returned, cameras flashing under the same sun that watched over prison walls. President Bukele appeared on television, smiling confidently. "We are the safest nation in the Americas," he declared. The crowd roared with pride. But safety has a price, and it was paid in silence. Behind the celebrations, families searched for missing sons and fathers. Mothers lined up outside CECOT with photos pressed to their hearts. "Please," they begged, "just tell me if he's alive." The guards never answered. And as the world applauded peace, the ground beneath that peace whispered, a peace built not on mercy but on fear. Every morning, the lines stretched beyond the gates, women wrapped in shawls, holding faded photographs. Some carried letters, others only prayers. They stood under the relentless sun, faces cracked with exhaustion, waiting for a name to be read that never came. "My son's not a killer," one woman cried. The guard glanced at her papers, shrugged, and turned away. The rules said nothing about compassion. Rain or shine, they returned, forming a living monument to grief. Reporters came and went. Politicians promised answers. But the gates of CECOT stayed shut, and the silence that spilled from them was deafening. On the inside, Santos sometimes thought he could hear them. Faint voices carried through the vents, calling names swallowed by walls. "They think we're gone," he whispered to El Flaco. "But out there," someone still remembers. Inside the cell, the air felt thicker every night. The lights above flickered with strange rhythm, like a heartbeat out of sync. Santos began counting the seconds between blinks. 5, 6, 7. "You still thinking of the outside?" El Flaco asked. Santos smiled faintly. "No," he said. "I'm thinking of the storm." Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, shaking dust from the ceiling. "What storm?" Flaco pressed. "The one they built these walls to stop," Santos replied. That night, rain hammered against the roof like fists. The wind moaned through the vents. Somewhere deep within the prison, something metallic cracked. A single bulb sparked, dimmed, and went out. For the first time since the prison opened, a corner of CECOT went dark. Santos lifted his head. "It begins," he whispered. The lights died completely. A silence thicker than concrete settled over the halls. Then a scream. It wasn't a scream of violence, but of something unseen. Guards shouted. Doors clanged. Flashlights danced through corridors filled with fog and confusion. "Control room, report," someone yelled through static. No answer. The hum of the generators was gone. The world's most secure prison was blind. In the darkness, prisoners froze, uncertain whether to pray or stay silent. Santos's eyes adjusted faster than the rest. He breathed slowly, feeling the pulse of the chaos. He'd been through war. This wasn't fear. It was opportunity. The air smelled of ozone and something faintly burning. Somewhere behind him, Raphael whispered, "What's happening?" Santos didn't answer. The scream came again, closer this time. Whatever it wasn't part of the plan.